Hi again, everyone. So I'll start by introducing our two panelists for today, Luiza Santos and Eric Neumann, both PhD students in our lab. They're going to be talking about applying to grad school. Yep, you can go ahead and start your cameras, Eric and Luiza.
Hi, everyone. As Dean said, my name is Luiza, and here with Eric, we're going to be talking about applying to graduate school. So a couple of things that I wanted to say from the get-go is it might seem like we're talking about like a laundry list of different things. There's a lot of topics that we want to cover. So we organized this presentation in sections. So we're going to stop after each big section to address questions. So feel free to type your questions on using the Q&A feature in Zoom. And another thing is we're going to include some links throughout. This is not for you to have to like copy the URL yourself. We're going to be able to send these to you afterwards. So these are mostly for our records for us to know what to include. Great, so let's start.
Hi, everyone. I'm Eric. Thanks, everyone, for coming. See lots of people turning in. That's great. So just very briefly, who even are we to be talking about these things? I am German, so I did my undergrad at the Free University of Berlin in psychology. Was lucky enough to spend a year abroad at the University of Chicago. So that was for my junior year. And it was only there that I learned that there's a thing called summer internships for Americans and all kinds of other people, and that it's totally a thing in America. No one had told me about that in Germany, so there I was, and being totally surprised by that. And then I thought, well, might as well take advantage of that and do such a summer research internship. And I did that at Harvard. That was last summer. I'm now back in Berlin, finishing up my studies and starting at Stanford as a PhD student in a couple of weeks.
Great. So a little bit about me. So like Eric, I'm also an international student. I'm from Brazil originally, but I did come to Swarthmore to study. There's a really small liberal arts school near Philadelphia. And so I got my BA in psychology there. And then after finishing my studies, I worked at Northwestern at the Kellogg School of Business as a behavioral research fellow. So I worked in research full-time a year before joining our lovely lab here at Stanford. One thing that I want to say is that sometimes when I'm talking about my experiences in retrospect, and maybe for you guys hearing it, it seems like the path from start to college to graduate school was this like super straight line where everything kind of one thing led to another. But really for me living through it, it looked something like this. And I know that this is kind of like a cliche image, but I do think it's really important to acknowledge that sometimes these things are not super straightforward. And, you know, if you are applying, if it's not, for example, I finished my BA and I applied right away and I didn't get in anywhere. And that was really hard. And just thinking, it made me really reassess, like, do I want to continue in this path? And, you know, and then I applied to RA positions and it was really tough to get a job. And, you know, for me, like at the time I was an OPT, which is something that allows international students to work in the US for a year. And I had, I think, 2 months to get a job and, you know, the clock was ticking. So it was a very stressful process. And I wasn't super clear, like, what do I want to study? So if this is not your first time applying, you know, if you have these doubts, just know that many of us have kind of like these switchbacks along the way, and it's totally okay. So I think the perspective that I hope to give you today is just what has little tips that I learned along the way that helps change my application from my first cycle, which was unsuccessful, to my second cycle. So yeah, so all these things that we're talking today are based on our own experiences. So we're not part of an admissions committee, right? These are just some stuff that we learned along the way that we hope will be useful for you. Cool, so how we're gonna structure this. As I said, we have like these 3 big sections. So the first thing is before applying. So what are things that you can do before you're ready to apply to graduate school that can help increase your chances of getting in? The second section is the application process itself. And many of you are probably in this section right now, given that application processes coming up. And then the third section is post-application, which is a shorter section. And we might talk about each of these items in different levels of length because some of them are covered in other series of this workshop. For example, Dean and Sydney talked about a lot about research experience. There was a whole section on the GRE. So for those topics, we're gonna kind of briefly touch on them. Great, so let's just jump right in our first section. So Eric, if you wanna take us away.
Sure. So before you even apply to grad school, what should you have? Like, how do you know you're a good enough candidate? How do you know that? You can't. And there are many different ways to get into grad school. And there's no like one definitive ultimate criterion that everyone has to fulfill. And then you're guaranteed a spot in grad school or something like that. But something that's really, really crucial to have is research experience. Now, the more research experience, the better, especially when your research experience is related to the interests of your professor of interest. Now, again, as Luiza said, this is not usually a straightforward process, right? So you oftentimes have these people that get admitted and they like did research related to the stuff that they'll be doing in grad school 3 years ago or like the other end of the world. And everyone's like, ah, I knew that I wanted to do this when I was 4 years old. And, you know, this is my dream. And this is exactly the kind of research interest that I had. That's very rare. That almost never happens. I don't know anyone where that's actually the case. It's usually just, you know, you do what is convenient, you take advantage of the opportunities that you've been provided throughout your academic career. And then afterwards you try to make sense of them. You know, like, how do I bind these things together? How do they make sense together? And then you put them together and that's your application. And then you pretend like that is what everything has been leading up to. So I think it's very crucial to know that this is not super straightforward for most people. But it's still really useful to have some research experience in some different areas, but also about some topics that are somewhat related. How do you get research experience? This can be really hard depending on where you are. Maybe you're not in the US. Maybe it's not a regular thing at your college. Maybe it's not even being offered, right? So there are different opportunities and it can be hard to get to some of them, but there are many, many opportunities, especially these days when, you know, everything's online and maybe there's an opportunity for you to do some work remotely at another university, even if your university doesn't offer research experience. Now, you can RA during the semester, so you're a full-time student, you're taking courses, you write exams, and at the same time you're working for usually 10 hours a week, sometimes 5, sometimes 15 or even 20, and you just at a lab, you just contact the professor and you're like, I love your research, you're wonderful, I love you, can I work in your lab? Something like that, right? And then you see if they say yes. Usually not paid. Sometimes it is paid, it depends, but it's usually not paid. The advantage to that is it's easier to get the job, I think, if it's not paid because they don't have to pay you, right? So it's easier for them to just accept you and be like, sure. You can also work, again, full-time during the summer. That's not something many people know, right? So I've talked to many people in Germany and everyone's like, you can do what, right? That's an option. And that can be hard to know and also to realize because maybe your summer is different given your academic calendar. And it can be hard to see how you can fit in the research experience during the summer. But still, there are many opportunities in the US, many labs at all kinds of universities that have summer programs where you can work full-time in the lab, sometimes get paid, usually not, and just get the full experience and see what it's like to be a research assistant. Again, this is not just to build up your CV so you can get into grad school. This is also to see what research is really like, right? Because maybe some people have the idea that it's going to be wonderful and you have this idea and you pursue it and it's super quick and straightforward and it works out and 5 weeks later you get a paper, right? It can be really terrifying to realize that that's very different and it's really so much harder oftentimes, but that there's beauty in that. And to see if you can find the beauty in this complexity can be really useful to realize that that's something you want to do for, you know, who knows how long, maybe the rest of your life. And then there's another option that you can be a full-time research assistant after graduation. So you could be applying to PhD programs at this point, but maybe you're like, I don't know yet. Or I don't think my CV is strong enough yet. So let's collect some more experience. This is usually just the case in the US. And unfortunately, it's really hard for international students to get these positions. It's not impossible, but it's hard because many universities do not agree to issue a visa. But it can still be really useful if you get that position. It's usually paid. It pays quite well, better than being a PhD student. So that's good. So you can save up some money and then live off that for a while. You will mostly be collaborating with other, like with grad students and postdocs, very rarely with the professor themselves, which might not sound great, but it is what it is, and it's great, and grad students can be great, and postdocs know a lot, right? So it can be an immense privilege to work with them, and you'll usually still see the professors, have meetings with them, and you will get a good recommendation letter from them. Usually, even if they haven't worked with you, but the grad student would write the letter and the professor just signs off or something like that. So that can work, and that's great. Again, summer RA-ships are open to everyone, and there are many, many available, but check out if you can get a visa if you're an international student. So that would be important, but don't give up, right? So I know people who are like a friend of mine who's from Ireland, and he got the summer internship and it was great, and he had the time of his life and made the friends of his life, I hope. But you can also check out lab websites just to see if a lab offers summer RA positions or something like that. There's also something international students might not know. Most labs in the US have a lab website with lots of helpful information. So you can check that out if you want.
Great. So another topic that when I was in college, I didn't know that carried a lot of weight for graduate student admissions is this idea that you have to know statistics, and nowadays coding skills also come in handy. So in my college, they had like one statistics class that they asked psychology students to take, and that was helpful. If you do have the time, I would highly encourage you to look for resources, especially the ones that are guided for people doing research in psychology, because those are going to be more applicable to you, and try to hone your skills. Why that's important, I think it really set you apart from other candidates, especially in fields like social psych, for example, if you do have some familiarity with coding. And I know you might not be thinking about this right now, but it does save you a lot of time in graduate school. Like I feel a lot of like the first couple of years of graduate school is just kind of like learning and getting up to date with these skills. And I feel that if you're able to hit the ground running, like that would really be advantageous for you in the long haul. And one of the reasons that I think, especially knowing how to code is super important is that it's really makes your science easier to reproduce. So with point and click interfaces like SPSS, it's much harder for you to get a record of what you did. While if you're using Python and R, you have a literal like recipe of every step that you took, from importing your data to analyzing it, and to cleaning it. And it's really, really helpful in terms of contributing to the open science movement. If you're interested in this topic, next week, Ian Ferguson and I are going to be talking more in depth about coding. So stay tuned. There are also a lot of free resources online. They're great. And these are some of the links that we're going to include later on. For example, there's for R, there's a whole book that is open online called R for Data Science that it's really great, and that like goes through a lot of the things that we do in psychology to import your data and clean it and wrangle it and all of that. Another thing that is important is attending conferences. I think the moment I attended my first conference, it was a vision conference, so it was not even in the field that I ended up specializing in. But that was the first moment that I was like, wow, this is a really great community and I really want to be a part of it. So if you have the chance, I would highly recommend attending conferences. It's even easier now, like with, unfortunately, the pandemic, you don't have to travel. So a lot of the conferences are being held online. So just take a look to see if you can still submit like an abstract or something to conferences that are aligned with your interests. So for a purely instrumental reason, it's really great for your CV. Like it shows that you're able to, conduct research and present it to a broader audience, which is very important. It's also an amazing opportunity for you to meet people who have similar interests and practice talking about your research. And of course, that's the whole point of a conference, is to learn about like emerging topics in your field. So a lot of the symposiums, there's some symposiums that are exactly the thing that you want to study. And then it's just really, really great to be able to sit and hear all these new ideas on people who have similar interests with you. And one thing that people don't know is that sometimes you can apply and submit an abstract for a conference, for a poster, for example, even before your data collection is complete. So if you have like a senior thesis or something that, you have hypotheses and you're going to start data collection, but you haven't got to that stage yet, you can send in like your hypotheses and everything and see if you can get accepted for a poster. The one problem with conferences is that they tend to be expensive. And you have to usually travel somewhere. So take a look at your current institution if they offer travel awards, because they usually do, to help subsidize your traveling costs. And also the conferences themselves. For example, the biggest conference for personality and social psychology has an award to help people who are coming, for underrepresented backgrounds to attend its annual convention. So just keep an eye out for those opportunities. Great. So conferences are a great way for you to learn about research, but it does require, as I said, a lot of traveling and transportation in general. But academic Twitter is an amazing platform that allows you to get acquainted with research without ever leaving your home. And I think Eric is a way better presence in Twitter than I am. I feel that I mostly lurk around and like read people's posts, but I think that it's still important to join even if you're not actively participating in the conversation. And the reason why I think that's the case, it's because one, you can learn a lot, and like scholars are using the space to share their research and actively engage with different academic communities. So you can have a community that is related to the specific topic of research that you're interested in. And another one, there's like on R, for example, and it's just really great to be able to have those conversations and access to those resources. Another reason is to connect. So maybe you have like a couple advisors, potential advisors that you're interested in their work. If you follow them and they're kind of in a similar space, you can use Twitter's like friend suggestions because it probably suggest people that they follow or people that follow them. And then all of a sudden you have this whole network of people of similar interests that you might not have had access to beforehand. And the third thing is to stay updated. So nowadays people often share preprints of their work even before, so it's basically a manuscript of research that they just wrote up, and you can have access to that even before it's published. The publication process can take a while, so this is a way for you to stay updated on like the things that people are currently working on and the ideas they're currently having. And this is especially important if there are preprints coming out of the labs that you're interested in applying to, because that's one way that you can get access not to what your PI or potential PI is doing, was doing 3 years ago, but what they're doing right now, what they're interested in right now. And another reason is because people post job opportunities. So anytime our lab is hiring, sometimes people post when they're looking for graduate students. So it's just like a really good place to be to learn more about these things. It's so important that Eric pointed out that a person wrote a whole book about it. So there's another resource that we're going to share with you in case you want to learn more about building your academic Twitter persona. Great, so we finished the first step, which was before the application process. So now, Dean, are there any questions that we should take before moving on?
Yeah, one question that was asked about non-academic research, so like applied research with nonprofits, and will those experiences be valued as well?
Yeah, so it really depends what kind of work you were doing for them. If it had, because it depends on what skills you learn. So if you're dealing with like data analysis or something like that, that's a very great skill to have that you could easily say that you're going to transfer it over to an academic research position. It also depends which subfield you're interested in. So for example, for clinical programs, which we're not going to talk a lot today because neither Eric nor I apply to those programs, but I know that for them, like it's really important for you to have experience with like working at like hotlines and like things that have like a clinical application to show like that you're interested in this space. So it's going to depend a little bit. Academic research PhDs are all about research and academic research, so it is helpful. But if you to have those experiences, but the non-academic ones can really set you apart if they are related to the area of research that you want to go in, or if they taught you some important skill that you can easily apply.
Yeah, another question is that, so what if you had a full-time RA position in a field that is not directly related to what you want to study? How do you make the most of it for your application? What in that role do you sort of emphasize, and what do you leave out?
I think there's a lot of flexibility around doing work that might not be related to your later work, because there are lots of different takes that you can have on the same kind of research. So I had research that was really not related to many of the university's programs that I was applying to, but there's always a twist that you could put on it and like interpret it in a way. I hope our advisor doesn't see this right now, where you can interpret it in a way that it can like fit to all kinds of programs, even though it's the same stuff that you've done. Then on the other hand, to the extent that it is different, it's not necessarily always about the research topics that you've investigated, but also about the methods and about the skills that you have as a research scientist, right? So one of the programs that I was interviewing, I was asking the professors before I was applying, what do you value in a like research statement? We're going to come to that. And it was like, one of them said, I only care about the research topics you've done in the past. I don't care about what you want to do in grad school, because you're not going to do that anyways, because you know your interests change. And the other professor was like, I don't give a shit about what you've done in the past. I only care about what you want to do in grad school, right? So there's a lot of flexibility around these things. And so it's not necessarily a negative thing. And I think it's great that you're having this experience.
Yeah, I totally agree. And one thing that I will say is just like, you can always, if they're completely unrelated to what you want to do, and there's no way to do what Eric suggested of like tying them together in terms of topic, I think look at the methods, right? Like for you to say that you had experiences with every step of the research, from literature review to, you know, research design to presenting at a conference with them, this is an important experience in any topic, right? So focus on the things that there is some overlap, if you can. And if it's not in the topic, then, you know, anything that you learn in that job that would transfer to the topic that you want to investigate in the future. Okay, cool. I think, is there one more question, Dean, or should we move on?
Okay, there are a few more.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this one is to you, Luiza, but I think it could apply to a lot of other things too, of how hard it is being a Latina and to study and work in the US, especially if you come from a country that doesn't invest much in research or science in general.
Yeah, so that's a really good question. I've been incredibly fortunate to be able to come here for college, which made it easier for me because if I were in Brazil, I think my opportunities to, you know, do research in college, I was able to get a small grant to run my senior thesis and things like that. And those would be harder for me in Brazil. So yeah, so I actually have been really lucky with that. In terms of just being Latino in academia in general, I have found it to be, and this is only, of course, my personal experience, but a very welcoming place. Also, just to give you guys a sense, since Eric and I are both international students, half of my cohort is made of international students at Stanford. So we all have very different backgrounds. So I think especially now there's a push to like really value diversity. So yeah, so I think I always felt very, very welcomed. And yeah, and unfortunately with the questions of funding, you can always look for, if your country doesn't provide a lot of funding opportunities, you can always look at initiatives here in the US that, as Eric said, sometimes they're funding programs for summer research for people from different backgrounds and things like that. And it will just be a question of like, would you be able to do that on a visa that is like a visitor visa instead of like a student visa? So there are little things that you would have to think. It might be easier to do that now where everything is remote than if you actually need to like fly here to do. But yeah, but there's definitely ways of like trying to find those opportunities. Great. Sorry, Dean, I think you're muted.
Yeah, we have some more questions, but I think in the interest of time, we'll leave them for now and maybe circle back to them if we have time after.
That sounds great. Yeah, we have a lot to cover, so we're just going to push through a little bit. So we have time at the end for questions, so we cover everything that we would like. Okay, so this is probably the section that is applicable to most of you, which is the application process itself.
Okay. So what to look for, where to apply, what to do, how to go about all this. People always talk about program fit, research fit, all these things, which is really important. But what does that even mean? Okay, so one important thing to keep in mind in terms of having research fit with your advisor, potential advisor, is to find out what they're currently working on, right? It's very intuitive to think, oh, this is Professor X, it's really famous for Y. I care about Y, let's apply to that person, right? Oftentimes they don't care about the topic anymore because they've talked about it for so long that they want to do 180 degrees, something totally different, maybe even in a different field right now. And so what you want to be applying to are labs that are doing stuff that you're really interested in right now, that are focused on. So this can be professors who used to do stuff on this, but then they stopped, so you shouldn't apply there. But this can also be professors where you're like, this doesn't really sound interesting. I don't really care about that person, but then you check out their lab website and you're like, oh, that's actually really interesting, right? So this is really important to keep in mind. And also if you have any opportunities to find out what the professor is working on right now or plans to work on in the future, just got a like, gigantic grant for, so there'll be research opportunities for this. If you can find this out some way, because maybe the professor was just on a podcast a few weeks ago or something like that, that can be really helpful. And so just to keep that in mind. There should be more than just one professor whose interests align with yours, not only because you want to be able to have interviews with a couple of people when you're applying, but also because you might be collaborating with other people in the department, right? This is also something to keep in mind. How much do you want to collaborate with other people versus how much is that encouraged? Some departments are like, no, right? It's very isolated, you and your advisor, you know, than the rest of the world, we don't care. Sometimes it can be much more collaborative. Think about advisor style, right? So some people are like, I want to talk about every single question you have in your Qualtrics survey. Before that, you can't leave, right? And other people are like, you did that Qualtrics survey, right? Yeah, it'll be fine, right? So they're much, much more hands-off. Think about the advising relationships that you've had with people and which of these suit you most. If you're fine with both, that's great, right? More people to apply to. Try to find out information about course and teaching requirements of the program. We'll talk about this about business schools in a second. There can be very different requirements in terms of how many courses you have to take, what courses you have to take, right? So again, for international students in the US, the way it usually works is you have 1 to 2 years, usually 2 years, where you have a full course load. Maybe you get a master's degree along the way, but no one really cares about that. And then you have 3 years of just doing your PhD, doing research, right? And teaching. Okay, so this is maybe the most important point. If I could just make one point today, it would be this. Don't underestimate the importance of having a collaborative, supportive community, right? This sounds like a really bonus thing to have, right? I care about research fit and want to live off my stipend and all these things, but you know, warm, empathic community, might be nice, but it's like it's really important, right? You can be at the best place in the world, the best university in the world, but if everyone's just cutthroat and competitive and wants to like outsmart you all the time, that's terrible. And it's terrible not only for your mental health, it's also terrible for your performance, right? Because increasing people's performance by making them anxious doesn't work. It just makes them anxious and be like, oh my God, right? They want to stab me in the back. It's terrible. You don't get any research done, right? So you really win or lose on both fronts depending on the community that you have. So that's something really important. I think that if you look these things up online, doesn't really get a lot of attention. So the next point is maybe something more peculiar. Many people would disagree with this, but do think about location and stipend, right? Some people, they're like, it doesn't matter where your school is going to be. It's just important that you have a research fit, right? Maybe even a warm collaborative environment. But if it's in Ithaca, that's fine. Who cares about that, right? Some people are like, I don't want to live in Ithaca. And that can be important to know. and to think about it. And I think it's important to think about that because you'll be there for 5 years. So it can be great to think about that. And also your stipend. This is like usually tenured professors who are like, don't think about the money, you'll be fine. And I'm like, well, think about the money. I mean, you're gonna have to live off the stipend. You won't have time and resources to do another job at the side. If you're an international student, you can't even have a job at the side, right? So you're gonna have to live off the stipend. And it's gonna be 5 years. And sometimes you might be surprised there are programs that are not super famous at like some high-ranked university that pay quite well. And then there are some programs that are, at a high-ranked university and you don't get a lot of money and you're in a really expensive city. So yeah, do think about that, but people disagree and are like only focus on the research. Okay, so this is going to be a big thing because some people don't know that you can apply to business schools. I think this mostly applies to people who are interested in social psychology. So other programs can be a little bit harder, but if you're interested in social psychology, I think you should consider applying to business schools because especially high-ranked business schools often have social psych related PhD programs. They're usually called behavioral science or management because they don't want to acknowledge that they have psychologists among them. So they call it something different, but it's essentially psychology. Sometimes marketing, that's actually like marketing and it's much more businessy in a sense, but it can also be very psych related. And I know many people who've gone after the psych related business school programs and are having the time of their lives, right? So this can be great. Now, one question might be, do I want to do that, right? I don't care about business. Many people are like, I just want to do research. I don't really care about business. How much business stuff do I have to do? And how much of a background do I have to have? It's not going to be a lot of business stuff that you're going to do, actually, as it turns out. So the courses might be a bit more on the business side. The teaching might be a bit more on the business side. But the research you do, it's not really important. And I've talked to many professors and even worked with professors at business schools. And I was like, but how is that related to business? And they're like, I don't care about business. I'm just here for the money, right? Because you get a lot more money as a professor. You have many more resources, many more opportunities. And many of these things apply to PhD students, right? So the stipend you get is usually higher on average. There are fewer teaching requirements. If you want to do teaching because you like teaching, you can still get extra money, right? That's great. Business work experience is usually not required. Sometimes it can even be harmful. I talked to one professor and I was like, I want to apply here, but I don't have any business experience. Should I like pretend to have some? And he was like, well, if you want to get rejected, go ahead, right? Because it's really terrible. And he said many people come in with the business work experience and are like, I'm going to be in this environment and I'm going to be like a wandering TED talk all the time. And just going to be inspiring, wonderful ideas. But that's not what research is like, right? It's much more, down to the details, and it's much more, that's polished, let's say, in a sense. And to know that because you have an academic background versus a business background can be really useful. So don't worry about that. Again, the pay is much better. By much better, I mean much better. It's a little bit better for PhD students, but especially for professors, you get, I think on average, twice as much, sometimes even more, right? So it's a lot better. But then again, some people say don't care about the money, so that's up to you. You have fewer teaching and administrative requirements as a professor. You have much more funding for research. Business schools have money like crazy, right? So this can be good if you care about the money. One difference might be that you're less likely to do some sort of fundamental theoretical work, and it's a little bit more applied. But even that, compared to some social psychology programs, isn't even necessarily true, right? So I was actually overall surprised by the opportunities you have if you're at a business school, and how related and similar that can be to a social psychology PhD program. One thing to keep in mind, you can always change your mind about things, but maybe don't about going into business schools, because if you have a business school PhD, it's almost impossible to get some sort of psychology professorship later. Vice versa is a little bit easier, right? So you can be, you can have psychology PhD and get some sort of business postdoc and sneak your way in, right? But the other way around is really hard. and almost unheard of. So that would really be setting a career for you. So last but not least, the last point here, two friends of mine have created this amazing business PhD wiki with lots of resources. They know much better what they're talking about than me. And there's a lot of information in there that's really helpful. Check this out if applying to business schools is an option. Okay, so I feel like this is the section I just had to write because as an international student, I had no idea this is possible. So in Germany, the way you interact with faculty is you don't, right? You don't talk to them, you don't look at them, you just stay away from them as much as you can. In America, that is very different. It's very encouraged to interact with faculty, exchange ideas, and they're much more open to just responding to emails and messages, as many of you might know. Not all of them, of course, I'm going to respond to your message. But if people say something like, ask the professor if they take on students, you can actually do that, even if it's like a famous professor. They might still not respond because they're a famous professor. But if you just ask if they take on students, that's great. Don't ask more than that, right? Don't be like, you can be the most amazing student, but don't write an email like, I'm amazing, you should accept me for these reasons. Can we have like a 3-hour Skype session so I can boost my application and become your PhD student? That's not gonna work. And if it works that they respond to your question about if they take on students, they will likely not remember you because it's also not a question that's really hard to pose, so you don't gain a lot of points, right? So you don't really contact professors to boost your application. It's really just useful for you to know if they take on students, because otherwise you can apply and be the most amazing candidate, but they just won't care, right? However, and this is something I think is not really stressed a lot, think about having a longer conversation with PhD students in the lab, lab managers, full-time RAs, other people who are in the lab and not, I don't want to say not busy, but not totally busy, not like the professor level busy, I don't have time for it, like a short email. And I've had the experience that many of them are really, really nice and respond, and they might answer some longer questions, especially about what is the lab doing right now and where's it going into the future, right? Because this information might be on the website, would be really great, but sometimes it's not. Sometimes the website is even outdated, and like the last paper that was published according to the website was like in 2013. And that's not really helpful, right? You don't know what they're doing right now. So just reach out to them and ask, what are you doing? What is the lab doing? What is the professor looking forward to doing in the next couple of years? And then maybe think about how you might be interested in that and how you can use that knowledge to boost your application. If they don't respond, it's not you, it's us. We're busy. We might forget, or we might intend to and just not respond or something like that. It doesn't have anything to do with you. It's super nice. Also, if you reach out to professors and are like, I love your research, and they don't respond, it's not only that they don't like you, they probably like you, but they forget to respond because, academics don't get a lot of fan mail, right? They're really happy and they're just people. And when someone writes them, it's like, I love your research. It's like, thank you. That's so nice. And then they don't respond, right? But it's not that they don't like you. So don't take it personally. If somehow you have a connection to the professor you want to work for in grad school, right? So your current advisor, your thesis advisor, someone like this is like best friends with that other professor, and you have a chance to like maybe meet up to carefully arrange this somehow and word it in an email that's like semi-ambiguous or not, this can be really, really helpful, right? So if the professor really knows your name, this can be really helpful, assuming the conversation goes well, right? If you mess it up, don't apply. But if it goes well, this can be really helpful because there are lots of people who apply. And if they remember you, that's going to be really helpful. But again, that's very rare. And there's nothing wrong if you don't have that kind of like super advantage. That's the situation for most people. So don't worry. But if there's an opportunity to get such meeting over Skype, Zoom these days, that would be great.
Okay, great. So I'm going to talk a little bit about asking for letters of rec. It's not a big mystery, so I won't spend a lot of time on this, but I would say ask for letters from professors who you have worked closely with. And to this point is what Eric said, if you worked for a famous professor and you only had interactions with their graduate students, that's okay. But it goes without saying, don't ask a person just because like they're famous and you said hi to them once to write you a letter of rec, because they won't be able to vouch for your academic dedication and your research interest. Ask for letters early. I feel that, you know, you should ask for them like around 2 months in advance. And you give people plenty of time to write them. And if people accept you to write you a letter, provide a clear summary. So I'm sure you know, but like the schools have different deadlines. So it's really important for them to know when they should submit this. So I just sent my letters of rec spreadsheet with, you know, kind of like their the deadline and which days they should submit for each school. And they're doing something really nice for you. So I feel it's nice to keep them updated. So, you know, if you get an interview or something like that, on top of writing a thank you note for writing a letter, I think it's nice to let them know. And it's okay. Eric told me he did this. It's okay to have, if you have different interests and you're applying to like programs like they're slightly different and you have a letter writer that is better suited for one program or the other, you can ask for different people to write you, like you can submit different letters to different programs as well. So if that's the case for you, that's totally okay. Usually I think it's asked for 3 letters, and I know sometimes this can be tricky because not everyone works in 3 different labs, but they can again attest to different things. So it could be that like you have 2 really strong letters from people who worked very closely with you. Usually this is easier when you have a full-time job, because then you can have like 2 letters from your BA and then a letter from your full-time job. PI that can attest to your academic promise. Okay, so this is a really big section, which is writing a personal statement. I would say that personal is kind of a misnomer. It's very different from the type of statement that you write for college, where it's all about you and who you are as a person. A PhD is all about research, right? So that's going to be the bulk of this statement, is like, what do you want to study? So really think about which questions interest you. You know, are there things, and it can be by elimination, right? Like you probably tried different things and you didn't like this and you didn't like that, and you kind of like are trying to carve your way in. But really think about what are things that motivate you and that you really enjoy thinking about. And then the second thing is like, what experience have prepared you to tackle these questions, right? So again, to the previous question on how to, you know, frame an experience that is not related in topic, you can still talk about the methodology that you learn and the skills that you gain along the process. Make sure to specify the faculty members you intend to work with. So this is crucial. So a PhD program is in psychology is like a mentorship. So you usually work very closely with one person, and it's very important for people when reading your application to know who are the people that you want to work with, and be specific. Like I think, you know, usually a person has one person that is really connected, and then a second person that is a little less connected, and then a third person that are a little less connected, but don't list the entire faculty list in a university, right? Because that's not helpful. And the other thing is tailor each statement to the school. So why is that particular institution appealing to you? So look at their centers. If you're really interested in neuroscience, do they have like a neuroscience center in the school that you would be, you know, very excited to be a part of? What kind of resources do they have for neuroscience research? So it could be that they just have a lot of faculty members working in a similar space that you want to be in. So just keep an eye out for those resources to really make your personal statement tailored to your to each university. So this is something that some faculty members talked about when writing a personal statement. So this is from Jay Van Bavel, Jean Gruber, and Neil A. Lewis. And what they said is faculty members use the statement to get a sense of your writing ability, passion for the field, research experience, intellectual potential, and fit with the program. Your goal is to show that you are a deep thinker who's ready to become a scientist. Read some of the papers of their potential advisors have published, think critically about them, and offer specific ideas for extending the work in new directions. Look at sample statements from graduate students in your field. Ask for feedback from as many relevant people as possible, including graduate students and faculty members. And by faculty members, they mean not the advisors who are planning to apply to, right? Like that would be a little weird. But people who are currently working with. if they, it's totally okay even if you want, or like graduate students that you're working closely with, to ask them to give feedback. Most people are really happy to do it. I think that don't underestimate how important it is to look at sample statements. So if you're, like, please reach out and ask people if they would share past statements with you. I feel it was very helpful for me to understand the structure of a statement. And I think that was the main thing that changed from my first application cycle to my second one, is just like really knowing how to talk about my experiences and my research questions in a compelling way. And one big issue that I think many people have is just this question of like how broad. We're talking about like, talk about research questions in your personal statement, but how broad should these questions be, right? So I think it is very important to have some specifics. So some people are like, I'm interested in how people think, feel, and behave. Like that's entirety of psychology, right? So what about how people think that you're interested in? So I do think it's pretty important to have a general work, like a theoretical area that you're interested in studying more, but don't unnecessarily pigeonhole yourself, making it sound that there's only this one study that you want to run. Because as Eric said, you learn a lot in graduate school and you're going to collaborate with different people and your interests are going to change. And it's important to be aware of that and not, say that. So one issue I had when applying for the first time is that I would read an advisor's paper and then I would basically try to extend it in a direction, but it would be so specific that it wasn't really a research program. It would just be like a follow-up study to that paper. So if you're really interested, so in my case, I was very interested in politics and attitude polarization, and really interested in morality and how people think about morality. So I try to join these two things, thinking about like how attitudes become moralized in politics. So this is a research program, right? There could be many questions under this umbrella of research. But I think what I did the first time is like I would read a paper on like moral reframing of how you can frame issues, for example, climate change, with values that can be conservative. For example, like framing climate change as a patriotic thing, let's like saving, like US land and things like that, and how that can appeal to different political ideologies. It would be too specific for me to say what I want to study is the same thing, but instead of using climate change, I'm going to look at military spending and put a liberal frame on military spending. Can you get liberals to be on board with that? Like that's super specific. And what would we be learning from that? Like sure, how robust moral reframing is, but not maybe a lot more. So I think it's really important to take a step back and really think about, and in my case, it was really questions about like what in the world that were motivating to me. If you're a basic researcher and you study kind of, like more like processes that are more like related to vision and things like that, your questions are going to be slightly different. But just think critically, like, is this a research program? Is this something that it's that we could ask a lot of questions from this broader umbrella? And yeah, so I think one important thing, as I said, is tailor your research to each program. Don't just like change the name of the university on each one. You can tell when people do that. So it's really important that, as people are reading your personal statement, they are convinced that you want to go there. The other thing is make sure you highlight overlapping interests with faculty from each of the schools you're applying. So it's not enough to just say that you wanted to work with Jamil, for example, who was Eric and I's advisor. Say why, right? Like how about these questions that you said you're interested in overlap with stuff that Jamil has done in the past? And this is just like a logistical note, but make sure sometimes personal statements, each of them ask for slightly different things and ask you to include slightly different things. So make sure you address all those aspects of the prompt and that you stick to the page and character limit because it can differ a lot by school. Okay, so that was a big section. And then writing a CV, again, I'm not gonna spend a lot of time on this because you can find a lot of resources online on how to best write a CV. Make sure you include relevant things like education, research, work experience, skills. So if you know any coding languages, that's a great place to put them. And anything else that you think might make your application unique. So again, if you're interested in a clinical program and you have a lot of experience working for this NGO who, you know, works with communities dealing with, you know, specific issue, and that's related to what you want to study, like make sure to highlight those experiences because those are very valuable as well. I would say work on it early because sometimes professors might ask for it. So when Eric was saying about emailing professors, I just want to highlight that do email professors before you apply, asking if they're accepting students and just like introducing yourself. I think it's, yeah, again, you don't have to write a whole Bible saying who you are, but a very short email, it can be really helpful. Just even name recognition, right? And sometimes on those emails, people include their CV in case the professor wants to look at it. So just work on your CV early. And sometimes your letter writers, your letter recommendation writers might ask for that as well. So a couple of tips, just place things in chronological order. I feel that most people know this, but yeah, people are interested in your most recent experiences the most. So put those at the top. And save your CV with the date at the end of the file. So in my case, Santos CV, August 2020, for example. So you ensure you're always sending the most current version and not something that you wrote a year ago. And stay organized. Like each school asks for a lot of things. So this is something that my friend sent me of like the schools that she was applying to. And so she had basically a bar for like all the things that she had to do for the school in Excel. So she would keep track of like what percentage she had completed for each one. And then for each school, she'll have another tab with like all the things that she needed to do for that specific school. And then she had like some notes, for example, their academic of purpose, it has to be like this length. So it is really important, especially like also for your letter writers. As I said, send them these materials and like make sure that you know that if they submitted your letters or not. You usually receive an email. But yeah, and don't be scared to like remind them if it's getting close to the date and they still haven't submitted theirs. Okay, and then one of the things that you also have to do when applying is take this standardized test that a lot of people hate. The GRE and the TOEFL is only for international students who need to fulfill this language requirement to make sure you could understand in English, you know, classes, since that's been the language that is taught here in the US. Again, there was a whole section on this. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time, but the GRE takes different levels of preparation for different students. So just give yourself plenty of time to prepare. And note that you can take it, of course, more than once, but you do need to wait 21 days before taking it again. So sometimes it's nice to take it early. So then if you feel that you could boost your score and you want to try again, you still have that time before the deadline when you have to submit your results. And both tests are timed, which can be pretty anxiety inducing for a lot of people. So I would just say it's very important to get acquainted with the general format. So just get, so there are like a lot of free resources on like, you know, sample tests and things like that. Just take it as many as you can, just to get very used to like how the formatting works, because that can help a lot. So it can be expensive to take the GRE and send your scores. So I just wanted to highlight that the GRE does offer need-based fee reduction programs. So they offer free waivers or reduction programs. And they also have online resources that are free, because yeah, it can really add up when you're applying to graduate school. Okay, so we finished the biggest section. Dean, any questions here?
So we have a question about, and you touched about this a little bit, maybe you can expand a little more, the extent to which you highlight your interest or passion for a particular research program versus the flexibility and openness to pursuing new paths, right? So yeah, goes to the question of like how broad you want to be, and they're asking for a magic balance here, which if you can provide that would be great. I don't know if there is one.
Yeah, so that's super tricky. It is pretty hard to balance. I'm of course vouching for a middle ground, you know, where you say enough. Like in my application, I hoped that by saying that I had, you know, this umbrella of interests on this particular phenomenon, that was broad enough to show that that I would be flexible with like taking these different directions. So you don't have to say specifically like, I'm very flexible. But like you can definitely convey that by saying like you're eager to learn and develop these interests. But yeah, there's unfortunately no magic formula for like how broad or how narrow to go. And it's really going to depend on your potential advisor and what they value. So for my personal experience, like I applied to people who really cared about like applied research and like real world issues. So for those people, they were totally okay for me to be, for my questions to be rooted in things that conflicts and things that I was seeing in the world. So it was, for me, it was a smart move to go a little bit broader. But because we're gonna talk about this, but you're gonna have the chance to be very specific when you go to interviews where people are gonna ask you like, how would you design it? Like, sure, you said you're really interested in this question. How did you design an experiment to test it?
Thank you. Another question that was answered in text, so maybe it's worth going over a little bit, is for letters of recommendation, would you recommend asking people within the field, or is it okay? So there is a question here. A person debating if asking an MD for a letter of rec, would that be better than a psychologist? So like in terms of, they might not recognize their name, but this person will be able to attest their skills a lot more than others. So what would you recommend on that? And if you can expand on that a little bit.
So I think some flexibility around this is possible, because don't forget you have 3 letters, right? So maybe not all 3 of them should be from someone who's totally outside the field, but if you have 2 maybe from people who are inside the field, and you have 1 person who's like, well, maybe not your mom, but like an MD or someone like this, that can be great, because there are many things that you might want to look for in a recommender. And it's, one of the things is that they might be in the field, they might even know the professor you're applying to working for. That's great. But it's also, they should know you, right? So you can have the professor who's best friends with the advisor that you want to have as your PhD advisor, but you just took 1 course with them, and it was some stupid 500 people lecture, and they don't even know your name, and they're going to write a super generic letter. If they're nice, they're not even going to write a letter. That's not really going to be helpful, right? So it can be much better to have someone who really knows you and likes you to write you a good letter. With all kinds of more personalized information, where people can tell, okay, this is not just a generic, yeah, I'm nice to people and say yes when they ask me to write a letter kind of thing, but something more personal and helpful for your application.
Yeah, thank you. Another question that was asked, maybe we can ask these questions together. One is about the TOEFL. If there's a person that completed undergrad in the US and they don't require a TOEFL, is it recommended to take the TOEFL? Another question is also about grades. So they don't have, like their GPA isn't perfect, it's barely above 3.0, but they have a really good GRE. Would their application survive the first round of selection?
Yeah, so first question, the TOEFL, you don't need to take it. It's not like an asset to have the TOEFL. It's really just like a check mark of like, this person can follow like a PhD in this language. So yeah, so don't worry about it. If you already have a BA here, you're totally fine. I didn't take it. I only took it for undergrad. Regarding grades, so this is tricky for Eric and I. So we're not in any like admissions committee or like, so we can't really say, like we only know about our own experiences, right? But I do think that research is the most important thing on a PhD application. So it's really about like, if you don't have an amazing GPA, but that's because, you took a lot of hard classes in statistics, for example, highlight that, like try to make it, a strength instead of a weakness. I can't speak if that would make the first pass. I don't think, yeah. So I think like usually people say that the GRE is used as a cutoff. Again, don't know what that number is. But I do think that your grades are perhaps not as important as you might think, because there's really an overfocus on research, because that's really what's going to matter for your for your career in science.
Okay, there's more questions, but in the interest of time, I think we're going to just do one more, and then again maybe circle back to them after. There's a question that if you stick to one research project throughout your undergrad or postbac, is that limiting? Is that seen as limiting in your application? And if you didn't like that that topic of research, and you were applying to something else, would that be seen as a weakness?
So I think that might depend on how you frame this, right? So you can frame this as some sort of, I've really deeply gained knowledge into this project that I've been working on for years and years, because I wanted to be familiar with one topic specifically rather than just with all kinds of projects and not really know what's going on anywhere. But then realize that what I really care about is this new thing. And then I've used the tools that I've gained while working on this project in depth, tools that I could have never, learned how to use had I been working on all kinds of projects at the same time and being, everywhere at once and nowhere in particular, to, research the project that I want to work on right now for grad school. So I don't think it has to be a disadvantage. It can be framed in a way that's really useful. There might be questions about this later in the application process, but if you frame it in a way that you yourself accept that is totally fine and totally fine, that's perfectly valid life experience, and it's great that you've had that, then you can define that, and I think people will be fine with that.
Yeah, one thing I would add is that if you worked on topic A and you really know you don't like it, sometimes it is useful to apply for an RA-ship on topic B that you think you're going to like, just so you show, one, for you to figure out if you do like topic B, and two, for you to show potential advisors that you're serious about that topic in an application. So that's just something to consider if you do think that they are very disparate. You can always gain more experiences in topics that are related to what you want to do in the future. Okay, so I think we're going to move on to our last section, which is, okay, you did this whole thing. Now what? So one thing is that you have to prepare for an interview. Some PIs are going to ask for a Skype or Zoom interview prior to sending in-person interview invites. Some schools don't have in-person interviews at all. Like I have no idea how it's going to work in the pandemic. Maybe all of them were going to be online. But if you got any kind of interview invite, if anyone reached out to you, like, congratulations, like you're like a finalist in this huge tortuous process. So things to know when preparing for an interview, I would suggest rereading your personal statement in your CV, and making sure you can talk confidently about those previous experiences. It really sucks if you said that you wrote this whole incredible honors thesis, and then when someone asks you a question about, like, okay, how did you operationalize this variable? You're like, I don't remember, or I don't know. So just make sure you have a pretty good sense of what you did, because that's super helpful. And now it's the time to be specific. So maybe not on, if the place does have an in-person interview, usually that first Skype interview is just for the PI to get to know you, and they're not going to ask you super specific questions about how to, study this phenomenon, but they might. So I think now is the time to be specific. So if you wrote this gorgeous statement with like the right, amount of like being broad and at the same time giving some specifics, now it's a time for you to think about, how would you implement these questions in a study? What kind of paradigm or methodology would you use? And you can also practice answering some common questions. For example, like, why are you interested in this program is a pretty common question that you can ask like your friends to ask you, and you can like practice answers. Yeah, and I think another important thing is just think about when thinking about how would you implement these questions in a study, really think about like, is this a correlational design or a causal, like, does this allow me to make a causal claim? Like, these things do matter. Thinking about, like, if it is a causal claim, like, which conditions would I have? What would be the participant's experience in this study? How would I craft it and make it sure that I'm measuring the things that I want to measure? So this is really like an important step to taking it to the next level in your application. Okay, and then, as I said, some programs will have in-person interviews. Most of the ones that I applied to did. And make sure you understand how the interview day is structured. And I cannot highlight this enough. Some schools you will only be interviewed by the faculty members you listed in your personal statement. Other programs may require you to meet every faculty member in your sub area. I had an experience at Stanford that for some reason I didn't know that we were going to be interviewed by everyone in the sub area. And I learned this the day before we were supposed to do it. And that was very stressful because I was basically learning about people's research like at night, like, and the next day I met with them and talked to them. Usually the interviews with faculty members that are not super associated with your research are much briefer. So like for Stanford, for example, we usually meet with the main person you apply to work with for like an hour, and then with other people for like 20 minutes or so. And yeah, so like this is an important step. Other things, like sometimes interviews days include social events. Like in Stanford, we have like a party. Just make sure you know these things so you like are psychologically prepared for a long day. If in case, because it's good to know, right? And I would also say usually they like give people a lot of like snacks, but maybe carry some snacks with you if you're hungry. Other tip, sometimes people want to have coffee all the time. And if you're a little bit anxious, being over caffeinated, maybe it's not the best thing to, be in this high pressure situation. So just make sure you pace yourself and that you know what to expect that day. Other things, so this is potentially where you're going to be for the next 5 years of your life. So try to gather as much information as you can. I think when I was applying, I was just so blown away that my second application cycle, I was having way more success than the first one, that I was just like, oh my God, this is my time to like woo them. They're also wooing you, like just make sure that you gather as much information as you can about the program, about how it is to live in that area, so you can make an educated decision later on. So you're, going to be interviewed by the person who you want to work with. So as Eric said, it's really important to like get a handle of like how their mentorship style is and if it fits with what would you like. So are they more hands-on or hands-off? Do you like to have a PI who would hold your hand a little bit and ask you, like with analysis and things like that? Or do you want to just be left alone and you rather just, touch base with them if you have questions and things like that? Ask them how often you would meet with them. Sometimes it's very important. If you're, depending on the advisor, you may rarely see them, and with other ones, you're meeting them every week. So one of my friends talked to her advisor, like they have brief meetings almost every day. So like what kind of style works for you? This is a really important question. Are you expected to work in a project associated with one big grant that the lab has, or would you have the freedom to create your own studies? And there's no right answer here, but it really depends on what you want to do. So if you really want to like have your own like research program that is maybe slightly different from what the lab has currently been doing, it's going to be important to you to have the freedom to do your own work. But if you love the work that's being done in the lab and you just can't wait to like, contribute to this body of research that has been conducted, then maybe one of their grants is actually a great way for you to collaborate with other people in the lab and get, more exposure to the research process as a whole. Where do they see their research going in the next few years? Is that where you want your research to go? So all these questions are kind of important to ask potential PIs. But also graduate students are a really important source of information. Like they're people who will be your peers, right? And they have a better handle than PIs on like what life is from the perspective that you're going to experience. So ask them about work-life balance, the living situation, what people do for fun, how their experience has been so far. I think a good question is like, if there's anything they wish they had known before starting. Course heavy, you know, do they have qualifying exams? Anything that you think could help you gain a little more information about the program. They're a really incredible source of information. And yeah, and also like time off, you know, what is the atmosphere? Do people like work 80 hours? Do they, you know, like what, and this is probably going to vary a lot by lab even. So like the more specific you can get about asking graduate students in your lab how their experience has been, it's going to give you more useful information. Another thing I'm going to say, and this kind of goes without saying, but be nice. I feel that sometimes I understand that it's a high pressure situation that you want to put your best foot forward, but you don't want to come off as like arrogant, you know, and you're going to be working with these people for a long time, you know, if everything goes well. So just make sure you know you're relatable. And I think that it's kind of an overlooked part of the process, that a lot of it is like also a person choosing who they're going to work for, who they're going to work with for the next 5 years. The PI is really important to see that you fit well in the lab culture that they want to create. I think it's nice that after the interview, people send thank you emails. I think it just shows kind of like go an extra step to just show that they appreciated the opportunity and that it was nice to meet. And I think also academia is a very small world, so it's just really nice to be able to have like good connections with people, even if you decide to not go there. Okay.
So just very briefly, this is a slide in case you're not only lucky, but very lucky and got admitted into more than one program. So first of all, congrats. This is great. This is an amazing situation to be in. Take a breath, be happy, and take your time, right? So you will have until April 15th to make up your mind, and you will usually hear back about whether you got in by the end of February, early March. Right, and it can be very tempting to be like, okay, now I finally want this process to be over. Let's say yes to this program, and then maybe 5 days later you hear back from another program. They're like, we want you, and you're like, damn, I would have wanted you too. Would have been great to go there instead of where I just said yes to. So definitely, well, visit all schools to the extent that would be possible this application cycle. Have virtual lab dinners or something like that with the people. I think programs will come up with some sort of stuff, because usually these tend to be really nice dinners and like professors telling you about all kinds of things all they once find, you know, super impressive about you that you didn't even know they thought about you, because now they want to woo you and they want you to go to their program. Also because it looks really bad for a university to accept people and then they reject them, right? You want to be, you know, the university where everyone who's accepted and goes there. And it's an interesting experience to be in. Again, culture, ask about lab culture, cohort culture, department culture, everyone's culture. See how supportive it is, how collaborative it is, or versus how cutthroat it is, and if you really want to be there. Ask about finances. Again, maybe do think about the money, do think about the location, check out the virtual campus on Google. I don't know, whatever will be possible, whatever universities will come up with, make the most of it. Definitely, because as Luiza said, academia is a small world. Send very nice, very honest thank you emails to the professors at the school that you reject. You want to keep up good relations with them. You probably like them, otherwise you wouldn't have applied to go work with them. They might like you up to this point. Many of them will respond and understand. Very few of them will not respond because they don't understand. That's fine. These are just people, they have their pride, that's all right, but most of them will understand. And then enjoy grad school.
Perfect. So yeah, so just some ending thoughts. I feel that for me, applying twice was a very, very stressful process. And I just want to highlight that if that's the case for you, if you're feeling overwhelmed, like you're really not alone, you know, like this happens to many of us. And if you receive rejections, just take some time to reassess the strengths and weakness of your applications and decide the next steps. You can ask your current professors for feedback. So, you know, they probably know your trajectory and your materials, and you can ask them like, how could I make this stronger given that it didn't work out in the cycle? And one thing that I want to highlight is like, just do the best you can. know that you can't predict it all. So there are years where your favorite professor is not going to be accepting students, or that university is accepting smaller cohorts. And that's, just kind of like the process is associated with a lot of noise. So for me, it was really hard the first time that I didn't have a successful application, because I thought it was like, this is the one thing that I thought I could do. And then all of a sudden, apparently I can't. And it's not about you, it's really, don't take it personally. Like it is a complicated process. There's a lot of noise and a lot of, unpredictable circumstances, but just try your best to put your best foot forward, and really talk about your experiences in a way that highlights all the great work that you have already done. And good luck. Being in grad school is a very, very exciting experience. So best of luck on this process overall. And now we can answer some of your questions.
Yeah, thank you so much to both of you. So one question that we have, so there's a person asking about people in their lab suggest that you offer to take grad students out to drinks or to have conversations about their experience in the lab. Is that normal, acceptable? That's something you're recommending?
Yeah, I think it's okay. I would probably ask for coffee or something that like they could do during the day. But yeah, I think reaching out to graduate students in general is a positive thing. Really, I would lower the barrier for them to respond to you. So usually what I've seen people done well is like, sometimes they email me about the lab and they say like, hey, I have 2 questions, like here they are. I would love to talk on the phone, but if you would rather answer these through email, it's totally fine. And that just makes it much easier for me. Like if you ask like, hey, can we have dinner and then, go dancing? Like that's a really big ask. So I think it's just be kind of specific on your email and try to make it easy for people to answer your questions. Okay, let's see, because I think we can see the questions now. Dean, I
So
think
there's some, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I can't click on them for some reason. So if anyone else can read them, that would be great.
So there's one interesting question about how we assessed what programs we were qualified for, thought we were qualified for, like balancing the likelihood of getting in with applying for dream schools. That sounds about right? So it really depends on your life situation, right? Some people are really desperate to get into grad school at the time that they're applying, and that I really want to get in somewhere. So I have a lot of like safety schools, and then I have some of my dream schools. Other people are like, I really want to go to this one school, or like maybe 2 others, and then I apply to these, and I don't really have a safety school because there might be an opportunity for me to do some full-time research work alternatively, or some other job that I could do that might help me, that I find interesting, help me get some money, and maybe even hopefully improve my chances of getting into that dream school. So it depends, but most people apply to a range of schools. Some only apply to 4 or 5, some apply to 15. I don't know what the modal number here would be, but it really depends on your individual circumstances, I think.
Yeah, and one thing I would say is, especially coming from a small school and kind of, as an international student from Latin America, like for me, I kind of had a little bit of an underdog syndrome where I didn't think that I could get in my dream schools. And sometimes and Stanford was my first choice, and I really didn't think that it would be possible. And I think definitely apply to schools that you may feel that you're underqualified for, because sometimes it's just your perception that you're underqualified for it. I think we're going to face imposter syndrome in academia. Like I feel like in every stage of the process. So sometimes don't sell yourself short, and the other thing is, the school caliber is very different from undergrad. So if there could be excellent research programs in schools that are not super, like don't have flashy names. And so, yeah, so your dream school doesn't have to be Harvard, it can be a smaller school that has a really great set of scholars that are doing work in your area of interest.
So there's another question about whether it's appropriate to follow up with PIs that don't respond to your email. If it makes information on this and don't want to disrespect their time. I think it's great to not try to disrespect people's time. And I think if they don't, like chances are professors actually read your emails. I'm surprised by this, but most professors read most emails, even busy professors. I don't know how they do it, but they do it. Again, if they don't respond, don't take it personal. I don't know what kind of email you sent. If it's just asking if they take on students, I think it's fine to resend that email and it's similar wording, very brief once. If it's a longer email with more complicated questions, it might be that they didn't respond because they didn't have the time. And I think in that case, it might be more appropriate to just send another email that might be different and it's just asking about if they take on students. That's really the one question you should be asking professors. And everything else, I think you should try to redirect to grad students or hopefully find out on the lab website or something like that.
Agreed.
Okay. If you find out from your current research that you are interested in other fields, but you do not have time to gain actual experience in this field before applying to graduate school, how are you going to talk about why you are interested in this program and make it sound persuasive, stand out in a personal statement?
So the question was, if you don't have experience, how do you make it sound like you're serious about PhD? Yeah, so experience is fairly, again, like you really think critically about the experience you've had and see if there is stuff there that is relevant for a PhD, right? So you may not have, it really depends also on the sub area. Like I have a friend in my cohort who has been doing amazing and he had a background in CS. And he was working in CS before he got into the psychology PhD. And so he didn't have a lot of research experience, but he had the skills that, their lab used a lot of like neural networks. And so he had the necessary skills to be able to conduct that research. So that was okay for him. For most people, especially if you're in our area, if your experiences are not super technical, I would suggest working for a year. I cannot emphasize enough how important that can be. I feel for you to kind of figure out and by working, I mean applying for a full-time position as an RA or a lab manager. And it's tricky because I think we all know and we all get frustrated with this idea that like sometimes for you to get your first job, you already need experience. So sometimes for those RA positions, they're going to ask for experiences, but I think you can tailor it a little bit more for those by saying that like you don't need a research question, you just need to say like if you had a job that was not related to research but had to do something with management, you can definitely talk about that in your application for RA positions. But I would say that it can be okay if you have a technical background and it's kind of, and you're applying to a lab that uses those skills. If you don't think that that's the case, I would highly recommend taking a year before you apply and really trying to get some research experience, because it's super important just for you to know if you like it even, before diving into graduate school.
So there were a couple of questions about clinical psychology PhD programs. I hope it's all right if we skip over these in terms of time and also because we don't know what we would be talking about. But from the same person, there's another question that I think is interesting is do certificates from Coursera or edX or something like that, would these be valuable in PhD applications? I think they could be mostly in demonstrating that you're motivated to do stuff and learn new things outside of your classwork, especially if you frame it in the sense that I wanted to learn about programming, but my own university didn't really offer an interesting course on that, or I didn't have the chance or not the money to take it, so I took a free Coursera course or something like that, and then gained my skills, especially everything with coding, which is really great to learn on platforms like Coursera or edX. That can be really great. And then to attach certificates or just mention that you've completed these courses briefly, not as a key point of your statement, I think that can be great.
Yeah, I would suggest including those in your CV. unless it's something, so for example, for data analysis, if that's something that you want to showcase, I think it's cool. Like if you did a course, but then you had like a small project. So nowadays, there's a bunch of open data sources that you can use. So if you really want to showcase that, like, for example, there's like the World Value Survey. It's like a huge data set that's collected a bunch of measures across a bunch of different countries. If you want to try, you learn R in Coursera, and you want to try to show that you really care about people's trust in government and how that varies by culture, and that's like one of the you can literally just download the data set and run some analysis in R, and you can say, and that really shows like unique motivation. So you can, I think the courses are great, and you can list that. Maybe I wouldn't list them in a personal statement unless they're very, like they're really important to you and to showcase that skill. I would probably list it in the CV. But if you want to take a step further and you want to like make it into a project, I think that can be, especially if it's, you don't have experience on the particular topic that you're applying to graduate school, but you want to show that you're very serious about that topic and that you care about it. There's a lot of ways of doing that without necessarily having to like work in a lab. You know, you can make use of these like downloadable like databases.
We're running a little bit out of time, but there was one other question that I really, really like, especially from an international student's perspective, which is what should I do in my master's to increase my chances of getting into a PhD program? And I think a really important thing to stress here is that the reason a master's degree in the US isn't required to apply for PhD programs is because they usually don't really help boost your application a lot. Because most of what you do during your master's is take courses rather than do research, and that's not super helpful. It can be helpful for people who want to apply to a PhD program that's different from what they did in the undergrad institution. But overall, it's really the research experience and the connections that you make that are really helpful. So if you have a chance to do research during your master's, that's great. If you do extra coursework on the coursework that you have already done and that you will be doing again and again, even during your PhD, during the first 2 years, that won't be super helpful, which is great to know because especially in the US, master's programs can be really, really expensive. And alternatives like looking for a full-time research assistant position can be much better because not only do you get research, but you get paid rather than have to pay. And it actually boosts your application much more.
Yeah, so one thing I would say, if you're already in a master's program, try to make the most out of the research experiences that you can. So reach out to people, see if you can work in labs. Like that's a really great way. Maybe take courses like, you know, on things that, on those technical things like coding and statistics, if you think that would be helpful for you. And another thing is, I agree with Eric. I will say that if you have the resources, you're an international student, you don't have a BA from the US and you want to do research here, if you do and you don't think you can apply directly to the PhD, like you don't have the necessary experiences and things like that, it is a way for you to gain experience, and then you can get the OPT, which I said, which allows you to work for 1 to 3 years in the US, depending if what you're, it's like in the name of your major. So if it's like an experimental psychology, it's considered STEM, and then you can get up to 3 years, and then you could, you know, do your master's and then work and then apply to your PhD. It is a long process, but I just want to highlight that as a possibility.
Just very briefly, some questions that might be possible to answer very quickly. What types of qualifying exams would labs have? There is no such thing as qualifying exams that you have to apply to grad school. There's the GRE, the TOEFL, and all these things, but there's no like universal test that you have to take. There might be specific requirements once you're in the program to like proceed, but if that is what you're referring to, but otherwise there are no like universal.
Yeah, so what I meant by qualifying exams is a lot of programs. So you do 2 years of coursework and then you take this big exam in psychology that says like, can you continue to get your PhD? Stanford does not have that. That's why our program tends to be a little more course heavy. And then we don't have qualifying exams. Other places you don't have a lot of courses, but then you have this big qualifying exam. And it really depends on what, and it's not lab specific, it's like the whole program. And it really depends on how they use this exam. Like some places it's like, it's kind of just a stepping stone. Everyone does it, like everyone passes it. It's just kind of like a lot of work, but it's fine. Other places use that to weed out. So basically they accept more people that they have funding for the 5 years. And then those qualifying exams will be used to take some people out of the program. So that's a really important thing to know as you're starting out, because yeah, it's good to know that, you know, you have to do this big exam that might determine your status in the program.
So there's some more questions about, so do psychology, cognitive science PhD programs have rotations, or do you usually get paired with your main advisor from the very beginning? You usually get paid with your paired with your main advisor from the beginning. You don't usually have rotations, but there's always some opportunity to, you know, collaborate with people. And if for some reason you totally don't get along with your PI, you can usually change to another advisor in the program. You don't have to leave the program.
Yeah, one thing is, depends if you're funded by your PI or if you're funded by the university. So at Stanford, we're funded by the university. So like changing advisors is a little bit easier than if you're funded by that specific person. And I would say that neuroscience programs usually do have rotations, but psychology ones do not. And so it depends if you're applying to a psychology program that has a sub area in neuroscience, it probably won't have rotations. But if you're applying to a program that's purely neuroscience and that's where you're going to get your PhD in, then they might have rotations because it's less of a mentorship process as it is with psych.
There are also two questions that I can't really answer, but Luiza, I think you could. A couple of them are about applying for grants as an undergrad when you don't really have resources at your university, what you can do. And then also one question specifically directed at you about how much content from that person's personality versus and diversity statement is okay to repurpose from the first application round to the second.
Yeah. Okay, so grants. So my school had some research grants to apply to. So this is like particular to your institution. Just take a look, talk to your professors if you need some funding to run research. And the reason why I had to apply for that is that I was doing research that was not related to what the lab was doing at the time. So I had to get my own funding. If you're an American student, a huge grant is the NSF, which can fund your entire PhD career. So it's really hard to get, but it like skyrockets your chances of getting to graduate school because then you already have your own funding. So there's a lot on grants that we don't have time to get into today, but I'll just start with your school, ask questions. If you're from another country, sometimes, see if they offer funding for research and things like that. And worst case scenario, as I said, you can still run research. It won't be, by using databases that you can find online. It won't have your own questions, but you can get at something that's kind of related. Regarding repurposing materials, the diversity statement, I think if you haven't changed a lot and nothing kind of changed for you in that realm, I think it's okay to repurpose it. The personal statement for me changed radically, but that's mostly because I thought that one of the reasons that it didn't work out the first time around was that I didn't know how to talk about my experiences in a compelling way. So that for me, I wrote a new one. And that's one thing that I would say in general with writing is don't fall in love with the first thing you write. I think it's very important to keep an open mind, take people's feedback, really take it to heart. I think that sometimes it's hurtful and you're especially when you're pouring your heart and soul into this document that's supposed to say who you are as a scientist, and someone says this sucks, it's not great to hear, but it can be really helpful. And so don't be afraid to write and rewrite your statement a couple of times, because it can be, it can really make your application much stronger.
Okay, I think there's one more question to go. The other ones I think we have answered at some point, which is about the timeline of applying to graduate school, which is a great question, or when to take the GRE, ask for recommendation letters, and all these things. So you can retake the GRE, even though you're gonna have to pay for it again. But there's gonna be I think 21-day period after you've taken it, so you can retake it, right? So plan ahead in case it doesn't go well, you're not happy with the scores, that you have enough time. You will get your scores right after you take the GRE, which is great from a time perspective, terrible from an emotional perspective, but you know your scores right after and don't have to wait. For letters of rec, professors can be slow even if they like you in writing these letters. And the things, they don't only have to write these letters, they also have to send them out, and sometimes individually to programs. Now, one question that many people had and that I had was I I can't ask my professors to send out, their letter to like 12 different programs. That must take so much time. It's like, it doesn't. It's really somewhat quick to submit these letters, and they're also great, I think Interfolio is it called, great programs where they can just upload their letter once, and then you can pay this website to like distribute the letter to like all kinds of programs, so that they don't have to do that. Not all universities accept these letters, but through these like intermediary institutions, but many of them do, so that can like shorten it up. And the professors are used to being asked to send out the letters to all kinds of programs, and they know that this is what it entails when they agree to write a letter for you. So don't be afraid to ask them, but do plan ahead and think about how much time you're gonna need to send these out. And in terms of writing your personal statement, as with all writing, as Luiza just said, it can be so much harder than you think it will be. And even if you're happy with it, which can already take a while, you might send it out to other people and they're like, I have no idea what you're talking about. This makes no sense. And then you have to like tailor it to every program, right? So one of the professors I was interviewing with, he was like, you should just write one statement and send it to all schools. And I'm like, well, you can do that, but you're not going to get in, right? This doesn't make a lot of sense. I don't think that's convincing, because you want to tailor it to the program, to the professor. And that can take a lot of time, but it's really useful, because in the process, you will get to know so much about the professor, about the lab, that you had no idea you would have to know. That's really useful. And it's also great preparation in case you do get an interview, because by that point, you'll already know a lot about the lab and the professor, and don't have to like start from scratch. So do plan ahead with a lot of time, also for revision, not just for writing it. And yeah, but I think if you start now or soon, you'll be fine. There's still plenty of time, and good luck.
Yeah, and I feel that one thing, to Eric's point, is that sometimes if your professors that you're getting advice from are a little bit older, they might only have been exposed to this process a long time ago, which was very different from what it is now. It's much more competitive now than what they experienced it. So keep in touch with graduate students, ask them questions, because sometimes they will give you sometimes more useful advice. There's one question that I think it's interesting about: how much do you care about school prestige versus the projects in the specific lab is doing? I would say that the most important thing when applying to graduate school is doing work that you like. Like, I don't think, it may seem hypocritical. We are at a good school, it's not, but really the motivating factor here should be, is this person doing work that you would be happy doing for 5 years? And if the question is no, but California weather is nice, like that's not gonna, like grad school is a really long process, and school prestige can matter, but it's really about the research you do at the end of the day. Like, you can have a really fancy degree from a really fancy school, and like, it's all about publication and it's all about output. So like, if the end of the day you're trying to apply for a postdoc and you have 1/5 author paper from a really fancy school, you're really going to be at a disadvantage compared to a person who was did a lot of great work, at maybe a less known university, but because the work that was being done there was really relevant to their interests. So I would definitely favor the work that's been doing in specific labs than general prestige and like, trying to find people at like fancy places that are not super aligned with what you want to do. Okay, I think one last question, then we should leave, but because I have a meeting with my advisor in like 5 minutes. But how much research experience should an applicant have to be competitive? Will this expectation be adjusted to take COVID into account? So it's really hard to quantify. Like, you have 2 posters and 1 publication, you're ready to go. Like, it's not like that. In my case, I had presented twice or 3 times in conferences in the past. And I had 1 manuscript that was being like prepared. And that was okay for me. I think, some people had very different experiences. My roommate was working in a lab that they were like just cranking out paper. So she had a lot of publications. And other people, I didn't have any publications coming in. I just had, some kind of poster presentations, and that was all right. I think exposure is really important. Of course, if you have a publication, that's amazing. But it won't be, it's not like, oh, if you don't have a first author publication, you're not going to get into graduate school. Like, that's what graduate school is for, in a way.
I also don't have a single publication. I don't even have anything under review, and I've never presented anything at any conference. So there's hope.
Yeah. So especially if that's the position you are right now, you really are set on applying this year. Like, it's okay, just talk about your experiences confidently, show that you're serious about what you're doing, and try to make the most of the stuff you already have. And then if for some reason it doesn't work out, then you have more time to gain those experiences and boost your application for the next round. But don't feel that the experience that you have collected so far aren't valid, because most of the time they totally are. Great. So thank you so much, everyone. It was a pleasure to speak to all of you about these things. We'll reach out with all those links, and just feel free to reach out, and good luck in this process.
Good luck, everyone, and thanks for showing up.
Thank you.